Welcome back to part 2 of this brief history of Chinese herbal medicine. The next period we consider are the Tang and the Song dynasties. The Tang dynasty is often considered the apogee of Chinese culture, which was widely disseminated in Eastern Asia and influenced many neighboring countries. Sun Simiao produced a work called Qianjin Yaofang, which translates as prescriptions worth 1,000 pieces of gold. This work summarizes the progress in medical knowledge up to that time. We're now up to 5,300 recorded formulas, and the medical field is organized into categories which are more familiar to us, such as gynecology, pediatrics, internal medicine, and so forth. Sun Simiao also emphasized a healthy lifestyle, paying attention to food and exercise. The Song dynasty, which followed, was probably more important in the way that it shaped the future of China. First, I want to say a word about the development of Neoconfucianism. Up until that time, different dynasties had leaned either towards Buddhist or Taoist principles while upholding Confucian practice. Confucianism defined the rules of social interaction and ethics. Buddhism was a religion which emphasized compassion towards fellow beings. Taoism, which later took on the trappings of a religion, preferred a retreat from society, emphasizing meditation and closer contact with nature. The influence of these different philosophies was also reflected in the way that medicine was practiced. Neo-Confucianism integrated Buddhist and Taoist thought and became the new official form of Confucianism. This hierarchical, patriarchal system offered stability and conservatism in the government, which explains why it is embraced even to this day. The disadvantage was that its seeming completeness biased the Chinese system of thought against progress and change. This created many problems, especially when China had to interact more actively with the rest of the world, starting in the 19th century. The establishment of the National Medical Authority created a mainstream or official version of TCM. In the same period, the Chinese imperial examination system became the basis for social advancement. Because of its emphasis on the knowledge of the Confucian classics and literary style, it served more as a cultural unifier while limiting scientific and technical progress. The introduction of printing established official versions of the medical classics, such as the Huangdi Neijing and the Shanghan Lun, which had come down in many versions and were now finally fixed in form. An important publication in this period was the Pharmacopoeia of the Taiping Welfare Dispensary Bureau, which contained formulas verified by leading physicians of that time. Many of these formulas are used to this day. Next, we talk about 4 schools that were to have considerable influence on TCM throughout the Jin Yuan period. In 1115, the Jurchens invaded northern China, founding the Jin dynasty, and the Song government moved south. Both were later overpowered by the Mongols, who set up the Yuan dynasty. Textbooks often call this the Jin Yuan period because of the convenience of the dates, but it would be more accurate to call this the Southern Song and Yuan period. Anecdotally, it is said that Liu Wansu, who we will talk about in a moment, 3 times refused to serve the Jin emperor. Yuan period, although ruled by Mongol emperors, respected Chinese thought and gave it an opportunity to develop. The 4 schools were as follows: the Cold School of Liu Wansu, the Purgation School of Zhang Congzheng, the Spleen-Stomach School of Li Dongyuan, and the Yin Nourishing School of Zhu Danxi. The Cold School of Liu Wansu noted that most diseases were accompanied by fever or inflammation, which were associated with fire. So in this school, prescriptions were made out that emphasized the use of cooling herbs. The principles were laid out in his book, The Theory of Dispersing and Brightening Formulas. The School of Attacking and Purging. Zhang Congzheng was a military doctor, and he employed a military metaphor of the body being attacked by 6 forms of evil influence. He proposed using formulas that induced sweating, vomiting, and purging. The Spleen and Stomach School. Li Dongyuan emphasized the importance of digestion and assimilation of food. TCM considers the spleen system to be the organ of transformation and transportation of nutrients. Li Dongyuan developed many practical formulas in this area and wrote the discussion of the spleen and stomach. His most famous formula, Purging Tang, is still commonly and successfully prescribed to this day. The Nourishing Yin School. Zhu Danxi proposed that health problems arose from an excess of yang leading to yin essence deficiency. His formulas emphasized treating yin. We could say that today's society displays many yang features, both in terms of activity and diet, and that paying more attention to yin could be beneficial to our health. Outside China, after the collapse of the Roman Empire, Greek and Roman medical theory was taken up by the Persians and Arabs, who made substantial contributions. Many of these early ideas are still found in Unani medicine. In Europe, the monasteries became the repositories of Western knowledge up to the Renaissance period. Monasteries often took on the role of hospitals for the poor and had their own herbal gardens. One of the great personalities of this period was Hildegard von Bingen, a German Benedictine abbess who was a great writer, composer, and philosopher, as well as a herbalist. She put down her medical thoughts in 2 books, the Physica and Causae et Curae. Back in China, the Ming and the Qing dynasties were to define how TCM is practiced to this day. A major accomplishment of the Ming dynasty was the Compendium of Materia Medica, or Bencao Gangmu, of Li Shizhen. This herbal consisted of 52 volumes, with over 1,800 medicinals that included some from outside China, such as rhinoceros horn. The work also corrected numerous errors. Li Shizhen wrote a dozen books, including an important book on pulse-taking. The economic development in the later Ming and Qing dynasties contributed to the rapid growth of Chinese cities. Overcrowding and poor hygiene resulted in epidemics. The major forms of disease changed from problems related to scarcity to problems caused by overpopulation and so-called diseases of the rich. In dealing with this, a theory of Wenbing, that is febrile disease, or literally warm disease, was proposed by Ye Tianshi, Wu Jutong, and other doctors. To maintain respect for older generations, this was proposed as an adaptation of the Shanghan Lun, although the approach was somewhat different, focusing on 4 levels of disease, Wei, Qi, Yin, Xue, which can roughly be described as progressing from the external layers to the internal blood layer of the body. It is in this period that the system of diagnosis currently used by most TCM doctors was developed. This is the Bagang Bianzhang, which can be translated as diagnosis using the 8 principal patterns. Zhang Zhongling's book, The Essential Comprehension of Medical Studies, in 1732 gave the first concise statement of the 8 principles, although its elements can already be found in the Huangdi Jing. In this system, doctors diagnose their patients to determine whether their condition is exterior or interior, if they're suffering from cold or heat, the status of yin and yang, and whether there is deficiency or excess. These patterns are associated with the activities of the TCM organs, or Zangfu, and their relationship according to the 5 transformations. Tongue diagnosis also begins to play a more important role, in addition to pulse diagnosis, which was always a major component of the diagnostic system. Towards the end of the 18th century, internal criticisms of TCM appear for the first time. Wang Qing Ren queried the classic notions of anatomy. Observing cadavers and victims of the plague, he noted the existence of the pancreas, the diaphragm, and the aorta. He put down his observations in his book, Correcting the Errors in the Forest of Medicine. But he is mainly famous for formulating the Zhu Yu Tang series of formulas, which are popularly prescribed to this day. To come back to our Western medicine parallels, in the 16th century, Paracelsus introduced ideas that were to change the way medicine was practiced. He challenged humoral theory and promoted the use of chemicals rather than plants. He proposed new treatments and introduced the study of toxicology. Most importantly, he emphasized the importance of experience in the education of a doctor, stating that they should go beyond academic sources to expand their horizons. In the late 16th century, the Jesuits came to China, bringing with them Western knowledge. They impressed the Chinese emperor and his court and were influential with the upper echelons of society for over 200 years until they were expelled. They were followed by American and British missionaries, who worked mainly in the villages and with the working classes. They in turn introduced Western medicine and Western hospitals. With the first generation of Chinese doctors educated in Western medicine, there was more criticism of the principles of traditional Chinese medicine, and many attempts were made to reconcile the two. Another thing worth mentioning is the arrival of the Chinese, mainly as laborers, in America in the 19th century. As their communities grew, TCM was introduced to the Western world and became one of a wide variety of medicines practiced in North America in the 19th century. At the beginning of the 20th century, the Qing dynasty was overthrown. The chaos that followed resulted in the country being ruled by regional warlords, and in the end, China fell an easy prey to the Japanese invasion. In this period, traditional medical thought was dominated by intellectuals who had a broad education and were well versed in the Chinese classics. In 1949, the government was centralized under Mao Zedong's rule. Under his rule, there followed more times of turbulence, with periods where intellectuals were persecuted and killed. As doctors were regarded as intellectuals, this led to a shortage of doctors in the country and had a catastrophic effect on society in general. To mitigate this situation, the government educated teenagers in the basics of acupuncture, herbalism, and a minimum of Western medicine, and sent them out into the countryside where they did what they could. These youngsters were called barefoot doctors, or 赤脚医生. Since the death of Mao Zedong, despite some difficult periods, China has made rapid progress in catching up with the rest of the world, both economically and scientifically. A discussion of the current state of TCM in China would merit a series of presentations on its own, but I will just make some brief observations here. Without exception, all Chinese are proud of TCM as a cultural treasure. The China Academy of Chinese Medical Sciences was established in 1955. Together with many universities that offer courses in Chinese medicine, it invests in research to corroborate the validity of TCM. Herbs are examined for their chemical constituents using modern scientific techniques. Numerous medical trials are conducted, and researchers write peer-reviewed papers. Most cities in China have both Western hospitals and hospitals of Chinese medicine. The photo below shows one of the main TCM hospitals in Beijing, in Dongzhimen. While the older generation often uses TCM, most of the younger generation prefers to put its trust in Western medicine. And then there are many Chinese in between who believe that Western medicine should be used as the primary form of care for acute problems, and that TCM should be used for chronic problems, or where Western medicine is unable to help. There are doctors who practice pure traditional Chinese medicine, and those that will use TCM diagnosis, while at the same time checking Western medicine blood tests or ultrasounds. However, all think of Chinese medicine as an important cultural heritage. Thank you for watching this brief history of Chinese herbal medicine, and I hope you will join me for further videos in this series.